All right, well, good morning. We're going to go ahead and get started. So this is week 5. So next week is our last week. And as I told you, this week we're going to take a little bit of a shift. We've talked mostly about local missions, about what it looks like to make disciples at home and work, across the street. We're going to shift today and talk a little bit more about what this looks like overseas and in different contexts. And when we think missionary, that's often what we think about is going to other places. And so we're going to talk about that a little bit today as we walk through some of these things. Talk to you a little bit more about some of our partners that we partner with at Buck Run, a little bit more about our budget, how we give to missions, what that looks like at Buck Run. Has anybody in here read the book by John Piper, Let the Nations Be Glad? Read that book. If you're wanting a book on missions, it's Let the Nations Be Glad. It's a tremendous book that in it, it's an old book now. Piper wrote it, I think, 25 years ago. That Piper says that missions exist because worship doesn't. That the goal of missions is to see people put their faith and trust in Jesus and worship God. That there are places in the world in which God is not worshipped, and we think God is worthy of all worship. And so missions exist because worship doesn't. And there are places that people who don't yet know God, that they worship false gods. They worship idols. They don't have the Bible yet to know about who God is. And so missions helps to take the Bible to these people that they may know God, they may hear the gospel, believe, and be saved, and may join us in the right worship of the one true God. This is what missions seeks to do. We've talked about Matthew 28, I think, every week in here. The Great Commission is we're called to make disciples of all nations. This is the call that we're going to talk about today, making disciples of all nations. So let's talk about first the mission imperative. Again, these booklets are in the back. If you don't have one or if you lost one, there's more back there. What it looks like then to bring the nations the gospel, to take the nations to the gospel. A few things we have to say. First, we do trust and believe that God will bring the gospel to all nations, right? That Matthew 24:14, 28:19, Revelation 5:9 tells us, Revelation 5:9 specifically tells us that around the throne of God, at the end of all things, that there will be people from every tribe, language, people, and nation, right? That there will be people around the throne, that the gospel in some way will make it to all the nations, that the gospel is going forth, and God is using us to do that. Let me show you something. When we talk about nations, we don't speak about geopolitical nations. When Jesus says the gospel goes to all the nations, he uses the word ethne. What word does that look like in English? Ethnic, right? So for a long time, we've talked about reaching the nations, not as reaching geopolitical nations, but as reaching ethnos, what we call people groups. So if you think of only geopolitical nations, right, places that have lines on a map that function as a nation state, the reason why that's not always helpful when we talk about reaching people is because in lots of places in the world that a nation may have hundreds of distinct people groups. When we talk about people groups, we mean people that have a distinct language and culture, right? That they are distinct in themselves. So, for example, we'll talk about Kenny and Cheryl Morris a little bit later. They're one of our partners. They serve in Panama. And in Panama, there are lots and lots of different people groups that don't really mix with each other. So there's one area of Panama, and Kenny and Cheryl go to up in the jungles, and they share the gospel with the Wunan people, and they plant churches there. That people group spans not just Panama, but crosses geopolitical borders into other countries. When I was there with them last year, where we'll go again this spring, is a place called Haiti. It's about 3 or 4 miles from the Colombian border. They work with a different tribe of people there. It's an entirely different people group, and they're planting churches up the Jungle River there. And those communities span over from the Panamanian side over into the Colombian side, right? That those people groups don't care about borders, that they live in the jungle. They're not getting to a spot in the jungle and saying, well, we can't go any further because Colombia's over there. No, that people group spans that whole region. So what Kenny and Cheryl are doing are planting churches on the Panamanian side that they can get to, and they're sending missionaries into the Colombian side to reach their own people. Right, so those are people that live in 2 distinct places, have entirely different languages, have entirely different cultures, view the world very differently, have entirely different worldviews. That if you were to say, well, we've reached Panama because we've reached the Wunan,
you've just totally left out the Imbara. They're entirely different people. They don't cross paths with the Wunan really at all. And so the reason we use people groups is it gives us a better representation of the actual people groups out there to reach, rather than just saying geopolitical nation states, that we're wanting to reach people. So that if you came to Panama and said, we're going to translate the Bible into Wunan, which they're working on right now, and once you did that, right, that's a huge process to translate the Bible so that people, the Wunan people, can read it in their own language. Or if you were to say, well, they're Panamanian people and they've got the Bible in their language now, what about the Imbara people, who are also Panamanian, who live in the jungle but have an entirely different language? The Wunan Bible does them no good. They speak Imbara. They speak an entirely different language. They too need the gospel. Right? They too need the Bible translated. They need missionaries to come and to share the gospel with them. So that's what Kenny and Cheryl are doing. So when we talk about reaching all people, most missiologists, IMB, Joshua Project, are going to talk about people groups more than they're going to talk about geopolitical nation states. These people groups that have distinct culture, distinct language, distinct worldview. And so you'll see globally, this is from the IMB from last year, globally there are about 11,730 people groups, right? Way more than there are geopolitical nation states. Right? I don't know the number in Panama, but there's 100 or so in Panama alone, right? So when we talk about people groups, there are about 11,000 people groups, almost 12,000. That's a lot of people groups. Now, I want you to notice the status is over here. This isn't in your book. I'll try to read these. I know they're hard to read. So status 0 is no evangelical Christians or churches that we know of. If there's a Christian there, we don't know them. Right? No access to any evangelical print, no access to the gospel, audio, visual, human resources. And when IMB uses this word evangelical, right, it doesn't necessarily mean evangelical in the way that we think about it. They're meaning evangelical, meaning that they actually are preaching the gospel, right? So that may be Southern Baptist, that may be other denominations, that there is what they would consider to be a bona fide gospel preaching ministry, right? That the evangelical is that it actually has the gospel, that they could hear what this ministry or this missionary is saying and be saved. So the people who are in the 0 category, there are no Christians that we know of, there are no churches, and there is no access to any gospel material, audio, print, visual, anything, right? 10 million people, about 0.1% of the world's population, 366 people groups. These are what are often called by the IMB unreached and unengaged, meaning there's no real effort right now, right? Nobody is there. They're all over the world. Some of these people are in hard to reach places like jungles. Some of these people are honestly deep in the jungles of Brazil and South America. Some of these people are in hard-to-reach places in closed countries, which we can't get to. Some of these people are in China. Some of these people are in Iran. Some of these people are in other places that are hard to get to, that are pockets. I mean, you think about even the Imbara people. The Imbara people are a pocket of people that exist in a really specific spot in the jungles of Panama and Colombia. Unless you're there, you don't have access to them. You're not going to get there. So deep in India. Deep in Pakistan, right? You've got these people that may be 40,000 people, 50,000, 100,000 people that are a distinct people group that we can't get to, that no one's there yet. So 10% or 1.1% of the population, 10 million people, exist on the planet right now, to the best of our estimation, that have 0 access to the gospel. None. No Christians, no churches, no access whatsoever to any evangelical print. You move up to status 1, which is just above status 0. Status 1 is what we say, that we would say there is less than 2% evangelical. The less than 2% of the population is what we would consider to be genuine believers. They actually believe the gospel. That there is some resource available, but there is no active church planting within the last 2 years. Right, so there may be a little bit of Christians, less than 2%. Often in that status 1 category, that's like 0.001%. Might identify as Christian, but often that means that there are little to no discernible churches. There's no church planting movement. There's no network of churches that are planting other churches. In that category, you'll notice that bumps up quite a bit. About 12.5% of the world's population lives in this status 1 category, 4,500 people groups, 963 million people live on the planet where less than 2% of the population would know the gospel.
in which there is no current church planting movement. There is no movement to plant churches so that more people could hear the gospel. You move up to status 2. Status 2 is less than 2% evangelical, so still less than 2%. The marker still remains the same as for status 1. But there is some initial church planting within the movement within the last 2 years, meaning that there is at least some effort to see churches planted in this place within the last 2 years. Now again, you bump way up there when you get to that category, 26% of the world's population, 1.9 billion people, 15% of the people groups live in a place that is status 2, again, less than 2% evangelical. And the only reason they're separated from status 1 is that there has been at least some movement to plant churches in the last 2 years. And then lastly, you go to status 3. It's less than 2% evangelical, and that there is generally a widespread church planting within the last 2 years, that there actually is a movement where churches are being planted. That's 1.5 billion people, or in other words, about 20% of the world's population. IMB considers status 1 or 0 through 3 to be unreached. They're less than 2% evangelical. Now, notice here, when you get to status 4, right, they're not considered unreached. What percentage of your population has to be identify as a believer for you to come out of the unreached category? Anything over 2% bumps you out of the unreached category. There are a lot of people in this category who are still not reached, right? There are a lot of people here, and then you begin to move greater than 5% is status 5, and then greater or equal to 10% evangelical for status 6. So total, if you were to add up the status 0 to 3, all the unreached people group, about 59% of the world's population are part of what we would consider unreached people groups, meaning that they are somewhere between 0 to 2% evangelical, with somewhere between no church planting movement to some church planting movement. 59% of the world's population. That works out, if you add up all those numbers, to about 4.5 billion people. About 7.5, a little more, billion people on the planet. There are about 4.5 billion people that live in these unreached people groups. Many of them in what we would consider unreached and unengaged people groups. That's a hard thing for us to think about, right? What's the population of Kentucky? Like 45 million? 4 million? Oh, wow, that was way off. Like 4 million? Yeah, there are 4.5 billion people on the planet that don't have access to the gospel, that live in places that have very, very little access to the gospel, very, very little church planting. Do you think about the fact that those 10 million people that are in category 0, unless something changes, unless somebody goes there with the gospel, unless somebody translates it into their own language, unless somebody goes, those 10 million people will be born, live, and die never having access to the gospel, never even able to hear it because no one's gone yet, that they live in places that are completely unreached. If you're interested in this, you can always go. IMB's got these reports on their website. There's a site called Joshua Project that keeps up with people groups that looks at those things. This is why it's important. Do you know what one of the highest refugee states in the country is that receives refugees? Kentucky is one of the highest states in the country that receives refugees. Why would that matter for us as Christians? Some of these people groups, many of them are ending up here. That we have opportunities to reach them, and what we're seeing is that some of these people are being reached and going back to their people group. They're taking the gospel back to places that you and I may never be able to go to. Kitty and Cheryl can't go to Columbia. They're not allowed. They're unable to. It's unsafe for them. The government doesn't allow them to. But they can baptize and train Imbarah Christians and send them into Columbia. They can go. And so one of the reasons, there are lots of reasons that people fight over refugees. As Christians, one of the reasons that we can see a good in that is that it gives us access to people for the sake of the gospel that we wouldn't otherwise have access to. Do you have a question, Alice, or comment? Oh, there's tons. There's Louisville has a huge population. Louisville has a lot of Somali refugees. There's a lot of Sudanese people in Louisville. There are a lot of Bengali people from Bangladesh in Louisville, and really all over the country. but all over the state. But Croatian. There are a ton of different refugees in the state from all over for all sorts of different reasons, right? There are Iraqi and Iranian refugees in Frankfort. There are people that are in our area that are here as refugees from other places, and it gives us opportunities to reach them for the sake of the gospel that we wouldn't maybe otherwise have. That there are some places. So the reason that some of these people are in that 0.1%. Again, there's lots of reasons why we can't get to some of those people. For some, it's geographic; it's really hard to get there. For some, it's language. For some, it's we're not able to go there. Right? The country is closed. We're not able to get in. And so the fact that some of those people are coming here is, I think, a good thing. It gives us an opportunity to reach many of those people with the gospel. That it does matter. That's a good question, Alice. Does this make sense to everybody? All right, so of the 11,000 people groups, a lot of them are still considered unreached. So the mission imperative is that we believe that God is using us to reach these, that God uses the church to advance the gospel. Right? That the Bible says, Isaiah 52, how beautiful upon the mountain are the feet of him who brings good news, who publishes peace, who brings good news of happiness. Right? That it is a good thing for us to take the gospel to these people, that we want them to hear the Bible. We want them to hear the gospel of the Lord Jesus so that they may believe and be saved. That this is what we're called to do, that God is using us to do this. That this is what the book of Acts is. That Paul's taking the gospel to places yet where the name of Jesus has not been named. Because we do believe and must remember that those who die without the gospel do go to an eternal hell. That's what Romans 1 says. That there is enough about God that we can know in creation to be condemned, but there is not enough in general revelation for us to be saved. In order to be saved, you must call on the name of Jesus. And so in order for people to be saved, they must first hear the name of Jesus, right? So I don't tell you this so that to try to scare you or guilt you or goad you into sharing the gospel with people, but to remember there is a real hell. That these are real people. That the fact that you and I were born in a place where we could hear the gospel, right? I didn't choose where I was born. That's God's grace to be. I didn't choose to be born in a place. I didn't choose to be born in a family where I heard the gospel, or be born 30 feet from a Baptist church that was going to preach the gospel to me. But yet I was, in many ways, blessed by the Lord to be in a place where I could hear the gospel. And yet there are many, 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 many people on the planet who are going to be born, live, and die in a place in which the gospel has not reached yet. And they will die and go to a Christless eternity. It does matter. It's why we care so much about seeing the gospel go to these places. This isn't a tactic to try to get you to move to a Muslim country or to sell all your stuff and go to the jungle, but to realize that this does matter. That missions, and particularly global missions, is not a tertiary part of what it means to be a missionary people. That it does matter. So sometimes I hear people say, well, rather than taking the gospel to a Muslim country, you should take the gospel to your neighbor. And I would say, I think we should do both, right? I think you should take the gospel to your neighbor. I think you have a responsibility to do that, but also that your neighbor probably is going to get that from some other places as well. The guy who lives in Pakistan isn't. The Imbaral people in the jungles of Colombia, right? They're not passing a Southern Baptist church on their way to get water from the river, right? That somebody's going to have to go to take it to them. So over 4.5 billion people in the world that live as a part of an unreached people group. So the church then exists to make Jesus known, right? We exist to make him known really in two places. One, where we are. Your family, your job, your street, wherever God has placed you, we want to make Christ known. We want people to know Jesus. We want to tell them the gospel and ask them to repent and believe, put their faith in him. And where Jesus has yet to be proclaimed. That we want to go to these hard places, to the dark places. We want to pray for God to send people. We want to give so that other people can go. And then we want to be faithful to go. When God calls us, we do want to go to these places where God has not been, where the name of Jesus has yet to be proclaimed, that more people might be able to hear and believe and be saved. That these church planting movements might happen. And what we see is that God does things that we wouldn't expect. Do you want to know where the church is growing fastest in the world right now? There are two places.
Where our church, Christians?
Yeah, where the true church is growing fastest right now. Iran, China. Iran and China. not the places that you would expect, right? Two of the hardest places that it is to live as a Christian are two of the places where the church is growing the most. You know, right now, where much of the missionary activity in the churches is, where many of the missionaries that are going to other places and taking the gospel, where much of that's coming from, it's not America. It's from Korea and from North Africa. Korea is one of the largest senders. South Korea is one of the largest senders of missionaries in North Africa. It's not America. Right? That we think of this often as, well, we've got this gospel and it's Americans who are going to take the gospel to the ends of the world. And what we see is that God doesn't, right? God's not playing favorites. It's not just that Americans do this. God's calling missionaries from all over the world to go to hard places. It's not just Americans who sell their stuff and move to hard places. People from North Africa do it, people from Korea, people from China, right? I've met missionaries who are in America from South Korea. They came from South Korea to be missionaries here because there are dark places here. Fort Collins is an unreached people group, right? That Fort Collins is a place in which it is less than 2% evangelical, right? That there are people who are coming to America as missionaries. So God is calling us where we are, where we've yet to be proclaimed, and God's doing things all over the world that we're often unaware of. Again, fastest growing place where the church is growing, Iran and China. Missionaries coming from South Korea, missionaries coming from North Africa. It's not just us, right? This isn't an American thing that we're going to fix it. It's a global church thing. God is doing this throughout the church globally. So let's talk about some practical steps to missions. One, short-term mission trips are a great way to be involved and to be plugged in. One, they're a great way to figure out what the Lord might be calling you to. Right? I've never met a missionary whose first trip overseas was to move over there full time. Right? Most missionaries begin to sense a call as they've taken place in short-term missionaries, in short-term mission trips. Now, the best way to do this is, I think Buck Run does this, and I know a lot of churches have begun to do this. The best way to do short-term missions is not to parachute into an area and to do some work for a little while and then pull out, but it's to find people on the ground who live there full-time and to say, we want to partner with you. Right? So when we go to Panama, we don't fly to the jungle and stay for 10 days and put on a VBS and then leave. No, we fly to the jungle with Kenny and Cheryl and with locals who are believers, and we go with them. And because I know that after I leave, I'm in the jungle with them for 10 days. But after I leave, guess who's going back? Kenny and Cheryl. And these believers that we've worked with, they live there. We're coming alongside and trying to help them. I know Steve and I have been to Romania together. That in Romania, when we send teams there, they're medical missions teams, but they're connected to local churches. So that though we're bringing many of the expertise, the doctors and the nurses to provide these medical clinics, and everything that RAM is doing, RAM is saying to these people as they come to the churches, this is not, I'm from Buck Run and I'm doing this. This is this church that you're in, the pastor right there, they're the ones that are providing this for you. I know he would love to talk to you, right? That we're trying to funnel those people to a local church because we're going to get on a plane and go home. And after we go home, we want those partners on the ground to have a better footing to be able to share the gospel, right? That the best way to do local missions is to partner with people who are going to be there after you leave, to come alongside and to work and to serve as you can to support their ministry. So when Scott took students to Panama, 4 years ago, maybe? 5 years ago? I don't know. Their last one was Malaysia, and the one before that, I think, was, 2016. When they went to a place that Kenny had been before, had done a little bit of relationship building. And so when they went, they brought coffee beans. And so our students, because they don't speak the language, spent a lot of their time planting coffee beans. So that they were bringing this as a goodwill offering. We want to plant these for you. We want to gift your village with these. And so while our students planted coffee beans, it gave Kenny a better relational connection. They'd be able to share the gospel. It gave him a foot in the door. And they baptized the first converts ever from that village while they were there. They saw the first people ever put their faith in Jesus, right? It matters because we're partnering. We're not just showing up to a random village and saying, we brought you coffee beans. We don't speak your language, but we'll see how this goes. No, we're partnering with people who are on the ground, who say who have these ongoing relationships because we want to see fruit. So I'm going to run through these sort of quickly. If you're interested in any of these, I want you to email me because I can get you more information. We're still working out dates on some of these. Really, almost all of these. We're still working out dates. C. Parrish at Buck Run.
C, is there a dot?
No, just C. Parrish at Buck Run. Here, I'll write it up here.
At BR?
At buckrun.org. They're hard to get to.
It's a really good movie.
So
It's a true story.
Jim Elliott's wife, Elizabeth Elliott, wrote a book and uses a bunch of Jim's and the other guys as like journals and things to write the book and to tell that story. Through Gates of Splendor. I was going to ask if anybody remembered the name of it. Through Gates of Splendor. It's a terrific book if you're interested in reading it. It's a really, really important book.
I heard her speak several times.
Did you? She's great. So here, I'm going to run through these quickly because I'll talk more about these partners as we, in just a minute, go through some of our partners. We won't go to Romania this year. I'll talk about that in a minute. Our partners, we still partner with RAM. The church that we're partnering with right now is actually a Romanian church in Birmingham, England. And I'll talk about that. I'll talk about that in a minute. So we do plan on taking a San Francisco team. That's the Butlers, which we'll talk more about them in just a moment. We're still waiting on dates for that. The Birmingham trip, which is to partner with our RAM church there. Again, we'll talk about RAM in just a minute. That's coming this spring. Still waiting on. Often we're waiting on dates from our partners, which is the hard thing, right? We want to be helpful. It helps us to know dates, but also we want to be helpful to our partners, and so part of it is saying, we want to come. Can you tell us when you want us to come? And it's always easier for us to know when we want to go than it is often for them to tell us when they need us to come. And so San Francisco, Birmingham, England, Panama. So we're going to go back with Kenny and Cheryl. We're going to go back to Haiti. So where they are, where they fly into Haiti, it's a small 10-seat plane. You fly into this little village that's right there on the coast. It's right by the ocean. It's a beautiful place. The Lord worked out for them to buy a property there that they're essentially running a hostel. They're running this small hostel in order to provide a way for the locals that they've reached to be able to live and be able to be sustained, to have a base to go from Haiti. Haiti is the biggest of the villages there. And then you leave, the river goes up from Haiti, up into the jungle and into Colombia. It's the base. So people from the jungles come down to Haiti to get supplies. And so this will provide a base for these new believers that they've been training on how to share the gospel, how to preach, how to take the gospel to these lost places, for them to live, to be able to be provided for, to have a way to make a living, to have a base, to then to go up into the jungle. So we're actually going to send some people to go do some, what a lot of these partners want is ESL training. They want to go learn how to learn English. So if you're interested in that, that's a great trip. That's going to be in this spring as well, probably May. We're again still waiting for dates there. That Panama trip, still waiting for final dates there.
When did you say the other trip?
Birmingham is going to be May or June. Again, still waiting on dates. And then San Francisco will probably be fall. Haiti, we'll go again. We'll talk about Bill in a minute. We'll go to has anybody in here been to Haiti with Bill? I thought you had. I knew you had, Steve. To go work with the Children's First Orphanage. We'll talk about them. Kenya, that Kenya trip is full. Students are going to Kenya. 24, 25, something like that.
If anybody drops out as an adult, can I go?
Sure, you tell Scott. I don't know who, it's full now, but if you want to go, you talk to Scott. And then the last one is Fort Collins. And actually what Fort Collins, this is our partners with Overland, Zack and Jen. What they need from us this year, they just sent us a bunch of dates last week and have asked for as many teams as we can get out there, is people to work on their building. On the church building that they were gifted.
Like a ability to solve things and stuff?
I think they want some ability, right? I think that's the goal, is that you have some technical ability. So they were gifted this building, and they've begun to they're having to part of the building was a school, and it doesn't quite fit all their needs, and so they're having to retrofit to get some stuff ready. They have a ton of kids, and so I think they're going to knock down some walls and try to expand some kids' area. And so much of what they need this year, what they've asked us and a lot of their other partners is, can you send us people for 5 days that can build? They sent us, Zack just sent us last week, a bunch of weeks from here to December, and said, any of these weeks you want to send people. So we're working to try to get a few of those out. Let's go through some of our partners. Maybe we should have done this first. So short-term missions is good. Again, if you're interested in any of those, contact me, and we'll have more out. Zack and Jennifer Thurman, They are sort of the team leads. He's the senior pastor, the lead pastor of Overland Church. But there's a whole group out there. The Samsons are out there. The Hancocks are out there. There's a whole team. Their whole team from Buck Run, I think it's like 27 or 28 now. The people who've come from Buck Run who are out there. They're reaching Fort Collins. They're the church. I here to hear them the last Sunday of the year, and they did Sunday school. Talked about what the Lord's doing. God's doing some really crazy things that are even greater than what we would have expected for God to do. Again, Fort Collins is a place in which there aren't evangelical churches. That when people get up on Sunday mornings and they drive to wherever they're going, they don't pass 7 churches that are preaching the gospel. And for most people, they don't pass any church. And the ones that do pass a church, the likelihood is that church does not actually preach the gospel. And so they're reaching people. Cristi and Samona Chivu, who are actually stateside right now. Cristi is he president, or what's his title with RAM, Steve? International coordinator. So he is international coordinator for Romanian American Mission. They're stateside right now. But we partner with RAM. We've partnered with RAM. RAM began here at Buck Run in 95-ish. So when I guess the first trips began to happen. 96, okay. So Romanian American Mission has now planted over 400 churches throughout Europe, starting in Romania, and then from there into Spain, into Austria, into the UK, into Germany, into Rome, or in Italy. Right there, they've planted over 400 churches. It is a church planting movement in that sense, that they are church plants that plant churches, that plant these gospel churches. Steve, how many times have you been to Romania? You lost count now. A lot. 20-something. You've been, Alice. Anybody else been to Romania? You've been? I've been to Steve with Romania a few years ago. I got really sick, so I don't remember a lot of it. But we support Cristi and Samona Chivu. They're stateside right now, and he helps to coordinate their stuff. Right now, we support Daniel Barra of Emmaus Church and one of their other elders, a guy named Tim, a pastor named Tim. So he was here. Not last year, but the year before. Not this past September, but the year before. Daniel was here. So Daniel is a Romanian pastor who actually pastors a church called Emmaus Church in Birmingham, England, that meets in the building of a English congregation, George Road Baptist Church. That the George Road Baptist Church began to see what God was doing through this Romanian congregation. And ultimately, as their pastor was nearing retirement, they came to Daniel and said, "Would you pastor our church?" Now, for an English congregation in Birmingham to ask an immigrant to come, a person who for English is a second language, to come and to say, "Would you pastor our church?" is a huge deal. In the time that Scott and I were there last year, if there's one thing that I was able to see, is not just in the church we saw, it demonstrated in an amazing way that we saw the grace, but we felt in the culture a large divide between native British people and immigrants, everybody that was not a native British person, that there was a lot of animosity there. And so for an English congregation to say to an immigrant, "We want you to pastor our church," was a really, really big deal. And what's happened now is that Emmaus Church and George Road Baptist Church are in the process of merging. That their intention is to have one expression, is to begin to worship together, to still offer their building to other nationalities. So there's an Eritrean group that has their services there, and so their vision is to be one congregation, to join the English congregation and the Romanian congregation together, and to offer their building to other specific language people groups with the hopes of eventually assimilating them into the rest of the church, like what happened with the Romanian congregation. So Daniel Barra is sort of functioning as the senior pastor of the George Road congregation and an elder for the Romanian congregation as they work out this process, as you can imagine. It's a difficult thing to figure out, what does this actually look like? Right? You think we have worship wars, at least all of our songs are in the same language, right? That you figure out, what does this actually look like to merge these two congregations? So right now, at least for the present time, our largest partnership with RAM is going to be with Daniel and Emmaus Church. Scott and I went to spend some time with Daniel and the elders and to see the church. I preached there about this time last year to say, we think that this could be a good partnership. What could you need from us? What does that look like? Obviously, many of our trips in the past have been to Romania, where they need medical missions. It's not something that they need in Birmingham. And so to say, what would you need? And if that's a need that we can meet, we would like to partner, but maybe that's not. And so what they said to us when we were there was, what we really need, because of our building, because of our space, we're not able to have Sunday school. Because we're sharing the building, there's not much space. Childcare is really difficult. We don't do Sunday school. They just have a service. And their people are spread out. Many of them work. Most of them are immigrants. They work minimum wage jobs. They're college students. They're young adults. They live all over Birmingham. It's the second largest city in the UK, so it's a massive city. They live in small apartments. We can't do community groups. Nobody has a place that's large enough to have anybody in their home. Also, they live really far away. If you've ever lived in a big city, you know that though you may live in the same city, to get from one place to the other could take a really long time. So what we really need is a way to help train our people, to help them learn and grow. And we want to teach them. We can't do Sunday school. We can't do community groups right now. We would like to do Thursday, Friday, Saturday sort of intensives to teach class. So we'll teach an overview of the Old Testament, or we'll teach a New Testament class, or we'll do something on the spiritual gifts, or we'll do something on parenting, do you guys have anything like that? Have you taught classes like that before? Do you have any sort of teachers that you could come over and help us teach? And essentially we said, yeah, that's exactly what we do on Sunday mornings. We would love to come and help you. Yeah, Alice.
All these precept studies that I've taken, did I do that?
Yeah. So essentially what we're saying is, you tell us what you need. You tell us what your topic is, and we'll send you teachers. And so the goal is that we will send teachers, people to teach whatever. If they're doing parenting, we'll try to send the best people we can to teach the parenting stuff, and then to send a team of people to provide childcare so that their entire church body can participate. So that we'll do a small VBS type thing for their kids, so that the rest of their body can participate. The good thing with Romanian church is that most of them speak English. A lot of them are under 35. So a lot of them have learned English. And so we don't need a translator. I preached there without a translator. Even preaching in the Romanian service, they have a live translator. So if people wanted to wear the earpiece, they could. And in a room of 100, I think 5 people were wearing it. Most of the people understood English well enough that it was not a problem. So we're waiting on firm dates there. We will go May or June. At least that's tentatively what we've been told, to help lead something like that, a Thursday, Friday intensive to teach through something, whether that's Old Testament or parenting or whatever that might be, doctrines of the church, and then to provide something for their kids, so we give everybody in our church a break so that they can actually have a chance to learn rather than to do this. We're excited about what this partnership will look like, this next phase of what RAM partnership looks like at Buck Run. Daniel if you've not met Daniel when he was here 2 years ago, Daniel is a phenomenal pastor and a really high-level guy. Every RAM pastor that I've met and been with have all been great guys, but Daniel's a great guy. This church, Emmaus Church, has planted 9 churches in the UK, and their goal was to plant 10. And Daniel said their 10th, that they really feel the Lord leading them, that their 10th is this new expression of George Road and Emmaus Church combined. So a relatively young church has planted, Scott and I were there for their 5th year anniversary when we were there, has planted 9 other churches throughout the UK, which is a really phenomenal thing. So we're really glad to be able to partner with them, with Daniel, and we also support one of their other elders named Tim. We give him some monthly support. Does that make sense? Any questions on RAM? This is one I'm really excited about, and I plan to be on that trip this year. Next, Bill Nalia and Children's First Haiti. This is an orphanage Bill started years ago, has grown. Every year he is able to expand it. We've had a lot of people go to Haiti. Alice, you told me you've been to Haiti, right? You've been, Steve? To go. Often what happens there is construction projects to build these. They're always trying to take in more children. And so often they're building new dorms or building bunk beds or plumbing or getting things ready for kids. I don't have the number. Bill told me recently how many children they host now, but it's quite a bit of children. This is something that Bill felt led to do and started, and it has been a part of Buck Run for a long time and a really important ministry.